Welcome to Montgomery County Community College and welcome to tonight's conversation. Tonight, we are having a conversation with Yuri Poole of McCartney Years, hosted by Rodney Whittenberg.
Good evening, everybody.
And welcome. Hi, Yuri.
Good evening.
How you doing?
I'm doing very well. It's so good to be here tonight.
It's great to have you here.
Very
So
excited.
let's get into it. My first question for you: tell me about your childhood. What was like growing up in Holland, and how did music come into your life?
Oh gosh, I had a great childhood. I have very fond memories of growing up. First of all, obviously being surrounded in the part of Holland that I grew up in was the flowers,
Yeah.
the tulips that everybody knows. We had it was funny how our family worked because music wasn't really in our family at all. Nobody in the family played any music. So when I asked one day when I believe it was 6 or 7 years old, to play music, I remember my mom being over the moon because she sort of had a little stint back in her younger days where she sang a little bit in the band, but nothing really came out of it. So she was really over the moon when I told her that I wanted to play an instrument. But my mom was very traditional, and she said, "Well, if you want to play guitar, which is what I wanted to do," she said, "first you have to learn how to read notes." And as a kid, you just want to go ahead and do stuff, right? You don't want to really be pulled into or pushed into something that you all of a sudden have to do. So I remember being, okay, all right then. So a couple of years went by, and I think at 10 years old, I said, okay, I'll learn how to read notes, and I did. I got some classes for about a year, and I remember walking out on the day and sort of like putting my bag in the corner. Well, I did it. Now I can have this guitar. And my mom handing me my very first guitar, and at that moment, pretty much just forgetting everything that I learned. So. So yeah, actually, up until this day, I read chords, but I don't read notes because I just do everything by ear. That's how I've always done it as a kid. Listening to a lot of music.
So at 8 years old, what was it that made you want to play guitar? What drew you to the guitar?
Well, music was playing in our house a lot. We had the radio on, and there used to be these two big speakers in each corner of the living room, and I remember as a young boy sitting in a corner and sort of rolling up in a ball and putting my ear against the speaker because although the music was on, it was always very soft.
Yeah.
So it had to be sort of background thing. So I remember listening to the radio a lot when I was younger, and I actually remember the day when I got inspired by the Beatles was we used to visit my grandmother, which was about half an hour drive from where we lived, and we would visit her every weekend, and the radio would be on. And I remember a song coming on the radio called "A Hard Day's Night," and I remember leaning forward because the song has such a profound intro. It's the chord, right? And I remember being totally inspired by the song, the music, the guitars, the harmonies, and I remember asking my dad, who had a lot of records, the big black vinyls, do you have any of this music? And he said, yes, I do. And a couple of weeks later, he taped all of the vinyls onto little cassettes. And I literally played the music until the tapes disintegrated.
Wow. So I'm guessing I can sort of figure out how old you are. So 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, it's probably late 80s, early 90s?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah.
I was in Holland at that time. I remember what radio sounded like. So it was a lot of techno.
Yeah.
How did you avoid all of that stuff, or how? What do you think it was that made you not a person of that time, but wanted to look further back to the 70s, 60s, and 70s for music or inspiration?
It's really hard to say, but I mean, really what it comes down to is the music.
Mhm.
I mean, just as much as rock and roll hit the Beatles when
Yeah.
they were very young and inspired by the music that was from a previous time,
Uh-huh.
I think, you know, it hit me in a similar manner. You know, and the music by the Beatles is timeless.
Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
And even today, I mean, I have a 6-year-old son.
Mhm.
And obviously, I mean, there's a lot of the music going around at my house, and there's pianos, and there's all these instruments, you know, that he can pick up and play, and there's, you know, moments where we get together as a band and we rehearse, and he's there. But it's amazing to see his interest in the music develop in a way that I developed it at his age. So, I mean, I would say it's the music,
Music
you
really-
know, and because even in the 70s and the 80s, the 90s, I mean, all the way up to today, the music of the Beatles and McCartney,
Yeah.
obviously, in my case, is on the radio every day, somewhere, at
Yeah.
some point,
Yeah.
you know, and it doesn't matter where you are. I mean, you know, I lived in Southeast Asia as a teenager, and that was because of my father's profession, and it's the same thing. You know, the Beatles are everywhere.
Yeah.
It's almost an international language, you know, that everybody understands.
Yeah, it is. I was in London last year, and I went to Abbey Road, and I
Mhm.
was amazed how
Mhm.
many, how international all the people standing around running across the street were. It was the most amazing thing, and all day long, people just crossing that street and standing in the center.
Yeah, you can only imagine the people trying to, you know, drive
Drive
through
by
that.
too. It's a little teeny road too. It's really funny. So tell me a little bit more about, so from 10 to your early 20s, music. What did you take lessons? Did you join bands? What did you do at that point? Like, what was your that early part of your life like?
Well,
in relation to music?
you know, I've always been sort of difficult when it came to school. So for me, learning how to play guitar was like going to school.
Mhm.
So I didn't really enjoy that. And you know, the thing was, I was being taught music that I didn't want to play because I just wanted to play rock and roll. You know, and I learned a lot of classical stuff. And now it's great that I have some of that background.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, it's useful now, but you know, as a 12-year-old kid, you don't really see that, right? So, yeah, I mean, I had a year of lessons and then sort of stopped that. And I remember just putting my guitar in the corner for a couple of years.
Oh, wow.
But, you know, again, I think the music just got me to pick it up again. I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to, you know, throw myself into it and learn the music. And I mean, I knew all the songs by the Beatles, and you know, I'd listened to Paul's music, so I knew all the music. It was in my head. It was just, for me, it was just a matter of sort of transferring that onto the guitar. And I've always been a singer since I was a kid. I would sing in the shower. I would sing on my bike riding to school. You know, I always sing. So I knew that, you know, not being able to play guitar that well, but I figured, well, you know, if I sing with it, then, you know, maybe I can sort of take the attention away from my playing, and, you know, so that became a symbiotic relationship for me. So my voice and then the guitar, yeah. So that's sort of like what I did throughout my teens.
Did you play in garage bands at all, or?
Yeah, gosh, I mean, the very first performance I had was a little swimming club. We at the end of every year we go and do this little summer camp, and there's about 40 of us. And I remember for many years that was such a big event for me because I got to play. I remember Obla Di Obla Da on my classical guitar singing, and there was 40 people and they loved it, and I thought that was the most amazing thing ever.
That's cool.
But yeah, I mean, I remember joining my first band, and you know, we wanted to do something that we all liked. So here's a band that plays Nirvana and the Beatles in one set, you know, and and it was really just trying to get used to playing in the band. And but I've always had the intention at some point to just play the music of the Beatles. I felt like I've always thought that, you know what, I'll do this because I know I can do this, and I'll just leave everything else to other people who can probably do it better than me. And I was just really focused on playing the Beatles, and you know, I try to infuse that into all the bands
the
I've played.
bands you're in. So then you go to England at some point, I
Mhm.
guess, in your early 20s, and
Yeah.
tell me about your experience there.
Yeah, so by that time I was in my early 20s. I was playing, and I mean, I've always enjoyed playing the music of the Beatles and such, and that was sort of a big influence, and everybody, all my friends knew. And then there was this art gallery back in Holland I used to visit a lot, and I became friends with the owners, and they had this big grand piano standing there, and by which time I taught myself how to play piano, which was in the basement of my grandmother, so nobody could hear me. So, but there was this big grand piano, and I remember on some of the off days I would go and hang out, and you know, I would sort of like tinker the ivories, as I would call it. And I remember playing "The Long and Winding Road," which is a great, you know, great song. And the owner came up to me and said, "Hey, you know, you have Paul McCartney's vocal range. You should do something with it." And it didn't really occur to me. But a year later, I saw a Beatles tribute band in England, and it was called the Bootleg Beatles, not knowing that many years later I would actually be playing in that band. But I remember coming out of the show with a very good friend of mine and said, "You know what, I love the Beatles, but I don't think I could ever do a tribute." You know, it's one of these things. And then obviously a couple of months later, I saw an ad, and the ad called for a person who could impersonate McCartney's voice and his playing, but he had to be able to play bass and piano and guitar and everything, and I had all of that, and I thought, well, you know, why not? So I flew to England, and I did an audition, and I remember the room being full of a lot of people that were applying for it, and I thought it was just a great moment for me to sort of like hang out with people that had similar interests. So I did the audition, and I remember it being very short because I only played some acoustic stuff, and then some on piano, and it wasn't really a band thing or anything. It was just a bunch of people there just sort of like listening to what I was doing. And I remember sitting on a train back home, and they called me and said, "You have the job, and we would like you to perform with us in 2 weeks."
Wow.
So I had to learn about 35 songs in a matter of 2 weeks.
Wow.
Songs I'd never played before in the band situation. So that's really just how it started for me in the whole reenactment scene. Sort of.
Wow. So where did the inspiration then come for the McCartney Years?
So having played so by now I'd been playing in this band for many years, and we've gone to places like, you know, the Fuji Festival in Japan, and you know, just wonderful venues, South Africa, Middle East, Europe. You know, we're doing proper shows and proper venues, and I, you know, at sometimes after the show, and still today, I mean, we love to talk to audiences after the show, and I remember on a couple of occasions somebody saying, and you know, these are people that are just as big as a fan as you are, because I'm a big fan, you know, I'm doing this because I love it, and say, "Hey, listen, you know, you could do a very good post Beatles Paul, you know," and say, "Well, Wings, yeah." And this sort of like happened on a few occasions, and I remember sitting at home and sort of like Googling this, and nobody was doing it. And I thought, well, if nobody's going to do it, then I'll be the guy that's going to do it. So a couple of months went on, and I decided to quit the Beatles production. Everybody thought it was crazy. And I said, "Well, what are you doing?" "Well, I'm moving to North America, and I'm starting a production that reenacts Paul McCartney's touring career, so covering the Beatles and Wings,
Yeah.
because nobody's doing it. And I just, I think Wings is one of the most underrated bands, obviously because of the scale of the Beatles in the 1960s.
Yeah.
Even Paul himself couldn't help that.
Yeah.
So I just felt like I had to do that. And that's how the McCartney Years started now, almost 10 years ago.
Wow, that's so awesome. Let's listen to a little bit of the McCartney Years right now with a track called Live and Let Die.
When you were young and your heart was an open book, you used to say, live and let live.
You know you did, you know you did, you know you did.
But if this ever-changing world in which we're living makes you give in and cry, so live and let die. So live and let die.
Best experience ever.
Show is fantastic, really good.
It is one of the best experiences ever. That's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah,
So-
we actually we recorded that live. We sometimes record our concerts live so that we sort of like keep up to date with what people can experience when they come see the show. So yeah, this is one of the live performances we did.
And it sounds awesome. So breaking this down, so my first question in breaking down, how do you approach learning a McCartney song? Like listening to that, I'm going, all right, the flutes, the timpani, okay, that's really cool. Like you don't get that in a lot of tribute bands. So what's your process for learning? And I know that with the Beatles stuff, someone actually spent the time and scored every single Beatles song. So that stuff is really documented. But the
Yeah.
McCartney stuff,
No, it
is
hasn't
not-
been done.
Yeah. So what's
No.
your process for learning?
Well,
the songs.
I think having listened to the music for so long really helped. I think in the same way when I was asked to learn a 2-hour show in a matter of 2 weeks, the reason I could do it because I knew the music in and out. And the only reason was that because I was, I had played the tapes until they disintegrated.
Yeah.
And, I remember listening to the music illegally when I should have been to sleep, trying to separate all the tracks, all the vocal tracks and the bass tracks and drums and everything, even though at the time I was just playing guitar. But yeah, listening to the music is one thing. And also I noticed that over the years, especially when I started the McCartney Years and playing a lot of his Beatles stuff, I sort of almost like predicted some of the little thingies that he would do in songs, because it's amazing how when you really break it down to the bare bones, it's amazing how really the style of composing is fairly similar throughout. If you look at McCartney's Beatles stuff and then his Wings stuff, I mean, there's a lot of the same sort of setups, and he was playing more and more with that, obviously, as he got older and was more enveloped into the music. It's amazing to think that I sort of went through that same process where I could almost feel where he was going to. And I think that helped, to sort of understand McCartney in a sort of deeper level, having been sort of like inside the music and having to experience it. That helped. Obviously, having a stellar group, I absolutely adore every single person in this band. And in fact, we're so tight with each other that if one of us can't make it because they have to do something else, we don't play. We perform as a group, and and that's the other thing is that I remember, having played in a touring Beatles production, people would come and go, and some people would replace others
Yeah.
for a show here and there, and it sort of like took away from the feeling. So it's great to just tour with these guys, and we do that almost 100 times a year.
Wow. I love how you, when I looked at your website, how the members of the band are, I must say replicas, but you really copied the character of Wings.
Yes.
So how did you how did you find, you have someone listed, Linda McCartney, like, you have the members there. So you have Denny Lane. How did you do that? Or how did you go about auditioning them and finding them? And then, and did they play sort of like those players played when you found them, or did they have the same passion for that music that you did when you found them?
Well, first of all the musicians in the band are trained, like they're trained musicians and singers, like all of them. Even Linda, she's actually a really good singer. She's ridiculously good. But yeah, I mean, I remember doing auditions. But my philosophy has always been, don't settle with someone. If you have 10 people in front of you, don't settle with the one who is the best. Take the person that you really want to work with. And I remember, because I've seen a lot of musicians over the years in previous bands, and I figured if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. I want it right, not just for us, but also for the audience. Yeah. I don't want them to see some sort of like interpretation of what it might have been.
Yeah.
So I remember at one point I did an audition for guitar players, and I just every single person that was walking through the front door wasn't the person to do it, and I was really at my wit's end with this.
You got a lot of shredders.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's
frustrating.
the thing is like, not everybody I encountered a lot of great musicians. It's just that some of them weren't right for the job. Yeah. And this was my philosophy about forming this band. I didn't want to settle with anyone. I wanted the person for the job, and I was willing to go through any length to get this person to wait. And then I remember at one point, because I was already starting to set up this band, and I needed another guitar player to do Denny Lane, because Denny in Paul's band does bass, guitar, piano, and is a very strong vocalist, because as you know, Denny Lane used to be the singer of the Moody Blues. So, this is a strong personality. And where do you find a guy who has all of that, And then I remember placing a little ad on a website, thinking nothing of it, and this guy came back and said, "Oh yeah, I can do it." And I was desperate at the time, and I was like, okay, well, let's see who this person is. And I remember having coffee outside Starbucks, and just having a chat with him. And I said, you know what? We have a rehearsal in a couple of days. If you can do these songs with us, that'll be great. So we're actually rehearsing for the show. We actually rehearsed half a year before we ever went on stage, because we wanted our first show to be as good as the show that we're doing tonight. So we never really started out, putting something on stage that wasn't really what we wanted to be. And he came into rehearsal and it was just perfect. And that became Dave, now doing Denny Lane, playing the double neck guitar later on tonight. So yeah, it's just a very tight group, and that helps. All the musicians that you see tonight in this band are here because I think they're the perfect person for this job, but also they want to be here. There's nothing more that they want than to be in this band, playing these songs, and being on this stage tonight.
Wow, that's great. So I got the signal we're almost out of time, and I have so many more questions I want to ask you, and I want to get some questions from the audience too.
Yes.
But two things. One, why don't you play something for us live a little? Maybe Blackbird or
Yeah, let's
and
see.
then maybe you were when we were talking a little bit earlier, you were telling me about how Paul learned this style of picking. I mean, I've seen so many people play the song and not play it correctly. So maybe you could talk a little bit about
Right.
it before you, or as you're playing it, or while you're playing it.
Now, Blackbird is a funny song
Mhm.
because Paul had some classical backgrounds. Now, if you can, I don't know if you guys are picking that up, but all right. And Blackbird has got a very classical setup, just the way the chords run, and I think it's I think it's a great song.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's many ways of doing it. Like it's a very sort of like finger picking style. John and Paul both loved playing finger picking style guitar. When John, obviously John wrote Julia,
Mhm.
right? That's
Yeah.
a very
Mhm.
finger picky style, and he uses all his fingers. Paul used to like strumming a little bit more and finger picking at
Mhm.
the same time. So, like John or Paul would come up, and I'll see if I can do this here. So Paul would finger pick and you would strum. Now the way he would do that is John would use all his fingers to finger pick like this, whereas Paul would finger pick with these two fingers and then strum with this finger.
Oh.
So if I would play Blackbird the way John would play it, it would be like this. That's how John would do it. But then Paul, using the one finger picking. And then all of a sudden you have Blackbird, right? John, Paul. Right?
Mhm.
So and there's actually interviews where John and Paul would both talk about how they were sort of like competing with each other doing the finger picking style, because for them it was really new, So I'll play a few bars of
Yeah.
Blackbird. You wanna-
Mhm.
Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Take these broken wings and learn to fly all your life. You were only waiting for this moment to arise.
Very nice. That's awesome. So my one other question for you, and then I'll open it up to the audience real
Yep.
quick, is I'm just amazed, in doing the research before tonight and listening to the McCartney Years, and even the track that we played a little bit earlier, how authentic everything sounds. So can you talk a little bit about how you went about finding all the instruments that are pretty close to what McCartney would have used on that tour, on the Wings, the multiple Wings tours? How did you go about finding those?
Well, I think first and foremost is obviously is the most important thing in doing this is because here is a band and we're saying we're going to do McCartney. The first thing I always get is, oh, you're going to do McCartney. Let's see what you got. McCartney was a very talented vocalist, and to emulate some of the tastes and the intonations of Macartney's vocals is something that I've been working on for a very, very long time. And as you will see tonight in tonight's performance, is that the voice sort of like developed from his early Beatles years to Wings. It became much more of a live sound. But yeah, in terms of the instruments, when you really want to do something right, you want to do it right. And again, with the band and with the boys and the girl, getting the instruments was pivotal. Was trying to get the original gear, because the only way of really stepping into his skin is to really feel the instruments and how they respond to you, and I think that gives us a better sort of um, way to do this show in an authentic manner. But the search continues, like every day. Recently, we acquired the double neck guitar that you'll see tonight. And the story behind that is there's only 400 made on this planet, of which I don't know how many have been destroyed ever since. I mean, if you've seen a Who concert, you'll know that sometimes it doesn't work out very well for guitars, or have lost, or what, you know. And I remember when I started this production 10 years ago that I wanted a guitar, the same guitar that Denny Lane played during the 70s with Paul. But I knew there was only 1 year that they made these, which is, I believe, 70, or 2 years, 75 and 76.
Yeah, Ibanez double neck?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow.
And so, you know, there's a limit. So, and also, this was a guitar made for live touring. The reason for it is because it's got essentially two guitars, and it's got 12-string guitar and it's got a 6-string guitar. And we found ourselves, before we had that guitar and changes happening in songs, that we would have to put down the guitar, then pick up another one. So Ibanez came up with this concept of designing a double neck guitar, so that wasn't needed anymore. And we found, when we got that guitar, that we didn't have to do that anymore. But these guitars are very, very rare. So I found one late last year in England, and it was a band whose name I shall not mention, touring, and we communicated, and I told them, and they were selling this guitar, and told them what it was for. And I was talking to a middleman here, so this took a couple of days. And but the message came back and said, yes, we love what you do, and we want to sell it to you, because they didn't want to just sell it. So so that's a story about this guitar, the double neck that you'll see. It's from 1976. It has seen some interesting stages, and tonight it'll be here. And then obviously what probably everybody is waiting for is the Hoffner bass. Paul's Beetles bass. It's a bass, and the story behind it, obviously Paul being left-handed, there was very little choice in instrument. I mean, we're talking about the early 60s here, and the only instrument that wouldn't look off playing the wrong way around was a guitar or a bass that was symmetrical in whatever way you look at it. And as you know, a violin, whether you look on the right side or the left side, and whether you flip it around, it looks the same. So the Hoffner bass, which looks like a violin, was that kind of bass that Paul could play, turn around, and not look ridiculous with it. So that's how Paul became to play the bass, and also it was one of the cheapest. So, you know, I think he bought the bass for £5 at the time or so.
And it's so much a part of his sound, that early Beatles sound.
It has no sustain.
Yeah.
and that's the other thing. And sustain, I don't know how well people in the audience know music. Sustain is when you strum a guitar, it's the sound that lingers. They call that sustain. So the longer the sound lingers, the longer the sustain is. Now, sustain is great on a bass if you don't play a lot of notes, right? So that the notes sort of like are stuck to each other that way. But this bass didn't have any sustain. So the only way to sustain the sound was to play more notes. And that's what Paul did. A song like I Saw Her Standing There is a great example of that. It's just one chord there at the beginning. And there's like, I think there's like 8 notes on the bar that he plays. So. But yeah, instruments is pivotal.
Yeah. What about the Rickenbacker for the 70s?
Yeah, so the McCartney Years show is not a show that if you go and see traditional Beatles tribute band that goes through the ages, where you know there's costume changes and wig changes and all of that. This is my real hair, by the way, and it'll be out there tonight. It's by choice, you know. The good old hair in the neck is back, right? Yeah, so it's more a concert show than a theatrical performance. And the reason we like doing that is that it sort of gives the impression you're seeing a concert. This is not a theatrical performance in which you're going to hear the story about Paul McCartney through the years, because most of our audiences honestly know that.
Yeah.
So we perform a concert. You're going to see a concert tonight. You're going to go home with the thought or with the impression that you've seen a concert. But this is what Paul McCartney himself would do and still does. When you go see Paul McCartney nowadays, that's what you see. You see a concert, and you listen to the music that he's performed all the years, and that's what the McCartney Years, and it's based on what a lot of fans regard in the 1970s as the height of his career. So it's a concert that you see when Paul was at the height of his career, when he was touring with Wings, like touring among super groups like Led Zeppelin, Queen that came on the scene. So tonight, the concert is a reflection of that era, but also of McCartney's touring years.
Yeah. And he played
Playing the
that,
Beatles and Wings,
Yeah.
obviously. Yes.
he played that Rickenbacker.
And
Yeah.
I play that Rickenbacker
Yeah.
bass
Which is
on the
awesome.
songs where it
Yeah.
should be, and the Hoffner bass will come out
Right.
when we play the songs that Paul himself played the instrument on.
I think we have time for one question from the audience. Is there a question out there that someone would like to ask?
Well, I will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are tons that I could, and I've seen McCartney. And the only thing I guess I'd like to know is, obviously, you have to have quite a vocal range to do Paul. Do you find it a little weird to go from the real, say, beautiful voice stuff, like Blackbird,
Yeah.
to something like primal, like, I don't even know if you do, like a Helter Skelter, like a screamy type, I mean, it's just such a weird
Oh, yes.
contrast, it's like, from a growl to a Tweety Bird type,
No, you're right, and that is a challenge. But over the years, I've sort of managed to, like, it's all about control. And again, every singer, and this is beyond the scope of McCartney. This is just general as a singer, having control of the different colors, I would say, because we're talking about colors here, about a voice, that's smooth and that's raw. It's all about control, and it takes many years to find that without blowing yourself up, essentially. Yeah, because I mean, we just started the tour now. This show we're doing 6 nights in a row, and then I have a little bit of a break, and then we're doing it, I believe, 12 nights in a row. So, and we do like songs like Maybe I'm Amazed and Yesterday right next to each other, So, but it's all about control. But that's something that every singer, including McCartney himself, has to at some point learn, and manage. And drinking tea with honey is part of that management. So, yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for our guest, Yuri
Thank you.
Poole.
Thank you.
Thank you.